Hello. Today I clawed my way out of my paracosm to discuss rights, specifically one of the rights stated in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the right to mobility. Every citizen of Canada has the right to enter, remain in, and leave Canada. That seems pretty self-explanatory. If you are a citizen of the country of Canada, you have the right to leave Canada, stay in Canada, and if you choose to leave, you cannot be stopped from re-entering the country without due cause. Now, let's look at the second part. Every citizen of Canada and every person who has the status of permanent residence of Canada has the right to move to and take up residence in any province and to pursue the gaining of a livelihood in any province. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Mobility in this quarantine situation? Yeah, right. We aren't even supposed to leave our houses, let alone the country. So, if we have the right to mobility, how can they restrict us like this? Well, there is more to the right. The rights specified in subsection 2 are subject to any laws or practices of general application in force in a province other than those that discriminate among persons primarily on the basis of province of present or previous residence, and any laws providing for reasonable residency requirements as qualification for the receipt of publicly provided social services. So let's unpack that, starting with Part A. Any laws or practices of general application in the force of a province. So, if Alberta has laws that limit the mobility for a good reason, barring any form of discrimination based on where they currently live or have lived in the past, they're allowed to have those laws. Now, Part B. Any laws providing for reasonable residency requirements as qualification for a receipt of publicly provided services. So that means if a province requires you to have, let's say, a birth certificate to have access to the healthcare in that province, and you don't have that, well, it's going to be a little bit hard for you to live there without those necessary things. Or, for example, if you don't have a passport, they can bar you entry into crossing borders because you do not have the proper identification. So, how does this apply to quarantine? Well, it really doesn't. So we have to dig a little bit deeper. So, this is where the Emergencies Act of 1985 comes in. It states that in emergencies, the state can take measures that would otherwise be considered unlawful. In these cases, it is deemed necessary because the collective safety of everyone is deemed to be more important than a few individual rights. This does, however, have limits and should respect the fundamental rights that are not to be abridged or limited even in a national emergency. Have I mentioned that Her Majesty, the Queen, is technically the one in charge of enacting these measures, granted under the supervision and guidance and consent of the House of Commons and the Senate, but still, the Queen. So let's look at what defines a national emergency. A critical situation of a temporary nature that endangers lives, health, or safety that exceeds provincial ability to control. I believe this is where we're supposed to fit in. Or threatens the ability of the government to maintain sovereignty. Now, I said we supposedly reside in the first category because our prime minister didn't do much and went into quarantine, self-isolation, hiding, because his wife tested positive to the coronavirus. Which, to be fair, that's what they're telling us to do. If you come back from traveling, you're supposed to isolate. However, this man is supposed to be leading our nation, and he himself was not sick. And there is this thing called FaceTime, or Zoom, or a telephone technology. Anyway, by the time our hero, maybe, emerged to take the reins and crack down to aid in the ending of this pandemic, the provincial leaders had pretty much taken care of it. So technically, the Emergencies Act cannot be enacted in this situation because provincial governments haven't lost control, and we're already enacting protocols to help slow the spread of the virus while our fearless leader grew a beard. A beard. Maybe the next point is more valid. Public welfare emergency is an emergency caused by real or imminent fire, flood, storm, etc., or disease in human beings. There it is. So how does this apply? Well, simply put, they decide that it is in fact a public welfare emergency. Upon declaration, they must present why there has been declared an emergency and what measures will be taken, and if this extends to the whole nation or just specific areas. They declare it to be such and have to submit a motion to act upon this declaration, and each House of Parliament must agree to the measures that are going to be taken. Now, only part of these regulations we only care about part of these regulations right now. The regulation or prohibition, inability to travel because of the law, from or within any specified area where necessary for the protection of the health or safety of individuals. Let's read that again. The regulation or prohibition of travel to, from, or within any specified area where necessary for the protection of the health or safety of individuals. So under this act, they can, and technically they have, restricted our freedom of mobility. Even though the act not only hasn't officially been enacted, but it technically can't legally be enacted. So the real question is it moral to do so? I would say yes in this situation. Or in similar situations, public health and safety depends on a lack of travel right now. Another example of a time when travel and mobility should be restricted is in the case of criminal activity and terrorism. Dangerous people with the capacity to do dangerous things may need to be restricted in order to protect the general populace and prevent situations like the recent shootings in Nova Scotia. This is why we have regulations and restrictions concerning weapons crossing borders. In summary, if the general populace is in danger and restricting mobility will help to remove some of the peril from the situation, then the restriction of freedom is justified. And really, what's so bad about staying at home in your pajamas and eating peanut butter for a few weeks, or months, or however long this goes for? Thank you for watching to the end. I apologize for the long video, but I hope you learned a bit about the right to mobility and how it can and should be restricted when necessary. There are links to a copy of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and another one leading to the Emergencies Act in the description below. Stay physically distant, and I will see you next time.